Well, I wanted to welcome all of you here to the fourth and final webinar for our spring webinar series.
Eileen, if you want to wait just 1 minute, we're still at 9:59, so just it'll take a few
Oh, I'm
minutes.
so sorry. I sounded so serious. I was so proud of myself.
Thank you.
Am I?
I feel like we should have interlude music here. Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. It is the fourth and final webinar in our spring 2022 Connecting Research with Communities, presented by the Adirondack Research Consortium and Paul Smith. I'd like to give a shout out to Paul Smith for helping organize and support this, especially to Melanie Johnson, who is the maestro in coordinating all of this. Today's webinar will be tools for community-based science. And I'd like to remind the audience that if you have questions, if you would put them in the Q&A, that would be very helpful. And then if you have comments, certainly share those in chat. If we cannot get to all of your questions, then we will send them out to our speakers and they will respond, and we'll have those comments on the Adirondack Research Consortium website. So again, today's webinar is Tools for Community-Based Science. And we have three speakers today. Danielle Garneau is from SUNY Plattsburgh, and Danielle's focus is largely citizen and student engagement in projects using iNaturalist and promotion of the ecological research as education and Marin networks. So these are networks of scientists that are working on common problems. Brendan Wiltse is the Adirondack Watershed Institute Senior Research Scientist with the Adirondack Lake Assessment Program. He's focused on studying aquatic ecosystems and is also an accomplished landscape, nature, and wildlife photographer. Our third speaker is Greene from the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. He will give program highlights of the 4 different APIP community science programs that include public participation. Each speaker will take about 15 minutes each, maybe a wee bit more. And if you have a burning question, we can ask that at the end of each presentation, but I'd really prefer that we have most of the questions at the end of the presentations. And I'll give a brief introduction for each of our speakers before they begin. Our first speaker will be Dr. Danielle Garneau, who is a wildlife ecologist in the Center for Earth and Environmental Science at Plattsburgh State. She engages many students in research every semester, doing projects including field and molecular surveys of Lyme disease. She does turtle demographics, and with a network of other scientists, milkweed growth and distribution. She gained notoriety with National Public Radio stories about her roadkill Garneau smartphone app. And in recent years, she has been conducting citizen science on microplastic pollution. Danielle, are you all ready?
I should be. Thanks for having me, everyone. I'm excited to have an opportunity to share with you some of the research we've been working on over the last handful of years. So let me know if you're able to see my screen. Yeah, okay.
Looks good, Danielle.
All righty.
Can you give the full, will it let you do?
I think I'm going to have to stop sharing. I'm sorry. It's one of those things again where it's not the projection screen. Is that better?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, okay. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the successes that I've had engaging in networks, and not just networks that are faculty that are working in schools, but also connecting with the greater community who are interested in participating in research projects. So today I'll speak a little bit about the Ecological Research as Education Network, but first I'm going to kind of give you a case study of how I began engaging in citizen science. And I'm a curious person. I think most of you that are probably on the Zoom with us today are as well. So some of the images that you're maybe seeing right now of potential citizen science projects might be enticing. And that's sort of where I found myself at the very beginning, coming in here to SUNY Plattsburgh and realizing I had an open slate of things to teach my students, and also knowing that there was a growing use of technology to help and engage in these projects, things like smartphones. So early on, I joined in with IMAP Invasives and iNaturalist and started logging organisms and learning more about my local community because I'm not from this area. And that was really useful because my wildlife ecology class is part of an applied environmental science program, and we work really hard to give our students opportunities to develop skills that'll be useful for them as they move on to careers, but also to provide useful information to learn about the place in which we're living. And a lot of students were really interested in roadkill. I hadn't done many surveys prior to this, maybe just noticing some things along my route to work, but many times we found it a little tricky. Early on when I started here at SUNY Plattsburgh, was back in 2005, we'd have to arm each of our students with a GPS unit as well as a camera in order to make some of these projects effective. And so you can see here some of our early work, two students, Matt and Lisa, who were basically logging roadkill using those two different devices over the course of the semester and looking at habitat use for these organisms. And nowadays, it's really easy if you want to engage in research, even if you don't have a STEM background, it's easy to do. You can go online, you can check out some of the citizen science repositories like citsci.org and SciStarter, and also Zooniverse. There's a wide variety of things that you can engage in. And if you want to take it, to the next level and create your own project, you can also use some of those websites and projects to develop your own. I also learned of an organization that's engaging the greater recreational community. So the adventure scientists and conservation are people that are out hiking mountains and biking across the country, and they are recognizing that there is a need that they may be able to fill and are actively engaging in projects to collect data, working closely with scientists and their questions. So in terms of the research, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, this is a map of my observations using iNaturalist, an app that you can download on your phone, and it'll allow you to georeference an image of an organism. So early on, once I had my smartphone, and most of our students did, we transitioned to using our smartphones as tools for research. But you'll notice in that upper right-hand corner, those red dots on the map, that's my route to work. So there's clearly a range, as a working mom, right? I don't get to travel all over the place. So I have a certain zone where I know I'm going to be able to collect data. However, there's a gap, a giant gap. And I think it's important to recognize that there are other people in the same boat and, interested in doing similar research. So you'll notice in the lower left-hand corner, this is an iNaturalist project. It's the Global Roadkill project. And so my observations are added to this global project. And now there's a greater extent, right? A greater geographic extent. Our research questions can, range from the local to the regional to the national level. And it allows us to also have quality control, because there are a lot of naturalists that are on the projects that are able to then help confirm your identifications. And for those that are participating, it gives you greater knowledge of some of the organisms that are in your area. So there's a greater sense of stewardship. So one of the pros of using iNaturalist, an app similar to this, is that it's very easy for you to access data. In many cases, you can just click on a button. You'll notice here in that lower left-hand corner, there's an arrow that's pointing to export observations. So if you're just, participating for your information, but you really want to maybe graph it or visualize it, you can download your data right away. You can do that with others as well if it's made readily available in the project. And as I mentioned, technology has been key, right? It's been, not a limiter, because you can actually go online and create your project using the web interface. But having your smartphone and being able to just pull off on the side of the road to log observations has been very helpful in growing this research. And when I first began, you can see here the number of adults that had smartphones was ranked at about 35%. And over time, we're now at about 85%. However, we should note that certain demographics are going to have, more readily available smartphone skills and use. So we tend to lose some of the older demographic engaging in some of the interactive smartphone use. But they're great reporting tools, right? We no longer have to travel around with a camera and a GPS unit if we've got our smartphone. And so at the very beginning, after realizing the smartphone was a really neat way for me to facilitate collecting data, I learned from a conference of an app called EpiCollect, which had been created by epidemiologists to basically track disease in areas where outbreaks were occurring. And so they made this app available to anyone who had questions that could be built into a form. And it allowed you to take your form questions, create a project, and then you could bring in a picture and you could geo-reference it. So using EpiCollect, which if you'll notice also at the bottom, it morphed between EpiCollect and many different versions. There are also alternatives to apps such as EpiCollect, such as I mentioned, iNaturalist and Survey123, that may be useful for exploration as well. But EpiCollect in the very beginning served me very well, me and my students, and we were able to create a project that was pretty useful for our needs in our region. And I should note also, I'm not a coder. I don't have a lot of that technological background. So anytime new phones rolled out and the apps just hadn't caught pace, it was very troublesome in order to kind of field questions by those that were participating. So being able to have a stable app that was doing updates and rolling them out as the new smartphones were rolled out was really an important thing to note. So my research project was roadkill Garneau. You can see some screenshots here. I built in form questions that related to travel on the road, habitat surrounding, weather conditions, whether or not this seemed to be a hotspot. And you'll notice that the project was pretty successful. We had a handful of animals that were noted, way more than I could have done just with my own research, 96 contributors and 23 states, as opposed to say just, where I grew up in Massachusetts and New York here, where I'm living and traveling every day to work. So what's exciting is that the research is still kind of ongoing, and we've got students in a current class that are actually analyzing the data using R, and they're going to be presenting some of that research in the near future. You can see a visual right here. What's neat to note is that not only do we have the hotspot up here in the North Country, but there are also some other hotspots that actually stem from students that went on to grad school or went on to jobs and relocated and actually, were active participants. But there's also some other locations where people just caught on, had heard through the press and began to participate in the citizen science project. These are just some rough visuals of results from back in 2015. You'll notice that regionally there are differences in some of the roadkill species that we observed. And down here in New York, obviously raccoons and gray squirrels, not a surprise to anyone. But there was an exciting trend that we noted as we continued doing these research surveys, and that was that opossum, which were generally rare in the very beginning, had emerged more recently in the last handful of years to be one of my most common roadkill species. So that's been kind of an exciting new growth avenue with this research, is figuring out why the opossum are moving up into this area, or they're reproducing and conditions seem to be better for them. It's been neat because the project has been embedded in other schools. So this is at Dickinson College. It was embedded in natural history classes. It also was translated over into German and used in an Austrian school as part of an international research project. So that was pretty neat to see. And we were able to, again, grow the scope of the research by connecting with our local NPR station, which then later it was broadcast in All Tech Considered and picked up by quite a few other interesting and things I wouldn't have actually even thought about having interest in our research project. So it allowed us to engage beyond just an educational setting. And speaking of engaging within the community, I think it's really important to be able to find repositories for data, and being able to create ResearchGate accounts or have online means of taking your posters and your press releases and whatnot, sharing them out there has actually made it easier for people to search for your research. We were able to take our microplastic research to the public. Senator Gillibrand's team a handful of years back had done some searching and found our posters, and they were able to engage us when they came up for a press conference while they were working with legislation to ban the beads, the microplastics. In terms of larger networks, the Ecological Research Education Network has really transformed my career. We are a group of primarily undergrad institutions, faculty that are teaching here with heavy teaching loads, and we're trying to engage our students in research projects. We can do that by embedding them in labs. You can see here there are many members of the Aaron Research Group, and we all have complementary expertise. You'll notice our locations are all across the country. So again, we can fill in the research gaps. And in terms of how it's been able to kind of transform my research, you'll notice that prior to joining Aaron, I had a much less robust repertoire of research projects. The goals of Aaron are to have these, research projects that students can engage within. We've got training videos that will allow it to be more easy for the general public to engage in these research opportunities and grow these skills. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, there's an earthworm project there. But we look at things like milkweed distribution across the country. We look at spread of invasive species like garlic mustard and emerald ash borer. We're looking at masting patterns and also lichen distribution. So there are a lot of really cool projects that you can participate in. And again, growing the extent beyond just where you're living, the extent of the research opportunities, and creating that sense of place. It's been really neat to participate in all these projects. You'll notice these are just some, shared social media posts of some of the work that the Aaron Group's done. We're tracking turtles. We're surveying for these invasive earthworms that are changing our forest understory communities. And we also have folks that are engaged in, I'm sorry about that, it's on a timer, I think. We have students that are engaged even in homeschooling that are participating in these projects. You'll see here down in the lower left-hand corner. And so I wanted to end just with an example of something that you could participate in, and that's the milkweed projects. So there is a organization led by many of the PIs for the milkweed projects. We're specifically looking at milkweed distributions along a gradient, a latitudinal gradient. We're looking to see if there are differences in adaptations, and this would be important, obviously, for monarch butterflies and so on. Emily Mole is our PI, along with some others, and they've been very effective in engaging, local schools and those natural natural history centers and so on in participating in these projects. And if you're interested in it, there is actually an opportunity if you use the QR code here, if you take your phone and open up your photo camera and you can scan a picture there, it'll bring you to the Marin website, which is this milkweed adaptation research and education network. It will give you an opportunity to participate in some of the projects. There's a lot of informational materials that are posted, videos and so on. But this is something that you could actually engage within and be part of this, this effort. So in general, for me, citizen science has become very mainstream. It's an incredible way to grow the scope of your research questions. And it's something that I could never have imagined I'd be able to participate in. In terms of what it's done for my career, again, it's made me a better researcher as well as a better neighbor, just being able to kind of communicate my findings and engage the folks that are at my school and in my community about some of the work that we're doing, fostering that sense of stewardship. And I should, with a caveat, note that technology has definitely enhanced our ability to facilitate this sort of research, but you have to be careful because, there are limitations, as I mentioned earlier, as apps and smartphones kind of roll out, there are some limitations as to what you're able to do in terms of fielding questions for those who have participated in the project.
Danielle, that was spectacular. Thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Oh, you're welcome. Sorry for the transitions.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. We're going to hold any questions until the end, unless somebody's got a burning question, and I didn't see in the chat or Q&A that anybody was desperate. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Brendan Wiltse is a senior research scientist at the Paul Smith College Adirondack Watershed Institute. Brendan oversees the environmental research lab at the Institute and leads their water quality monitoring and research programs. He has a broad range of interests in the field of limnology, ranging from the use of paleolimnological approaches to reconstruct ecosystem response, to recent climate changes, to using environmental DNA to map the distribution of brook trout in the Adirondacks. What do you think, Brendan? Are you all ready?
I'm good. I assume folks can see my screen.
Yes, it looks good.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending this webinar today. I'm going to be speaking about the Adirondack Lake Assessment Program, which is a program in partnership between the Paul Smith College Adirondack Watershed Institute and Protect the Adirondacks. I'm going to go over some high-level overview of what the program is, why it exists, some of the successes of it, and then speak specifically about an opportunity for folks to get involved with the program this summer. So a little bit of background information on ALAP, which is the acronym we use for the program, and why it started. So back in the 1990s, there wasn't too much continuous long-term monitoring occurring in the Adirondacks in terms of lake assessments or lake water quality monitoring. The Adirondack Long-Term Monitoring Program had started up. That's run by the Adirondack Lake Survey Corporation, and it's focused mostly on undeveloped lakes in the Adirondacks, like Avalanche Lake, pictured here. And the primary purpose of this program is to understand how the Adirondacks are responding to acid deposition, and specifically over the last few decades, the recovery from acid deposition. And so there wasn't really a long-term monitoring program going on at that time that was focused on lakes that had development in their watersheds. And so ALAP was formed specifically to look at these water bodies. There is another citizen lake monitoring program in New York State called CSLAP, which stands for the Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program. And at that time, that program was on a rotating basis. So lakes were being phased in and out, and we didn't have long-term data being collected on individual water bodies over time. So the benefits of ALAP and particularly it complements the ALTM monitoring work that's being done, and that we can look at both local and regional impacts to these water bodies. So we can understand how things like development, land use are influencing our lakes here in the Adirondack region. So the program started in 1998. At that time, there were 9 lakes enrolled. So started off rather small, but over the last, I guess, 24 years, we've grown to 89 lakes that have participated in the program at one point or another. We hover around about 70 lakes that are actively being monitored in the program. So it is a volunteer effort, meaning we're sort of at the whims of lake associations and volunteers in terms of which lakes enroll and how long they remain enrolled. So we do have lakes that sort of come in and come out as volunteers and leadership in lake association change. But we're pretty happy with having 70 to 90 lakes enrolled in this program. When we look at a map of where these lakes are in the Adirondacks, so it's pretty evenly distributed. The dots are the center points of lakes that have participated in ALAP. But what we also find interesting is when we look at the watershed. So a watershed is the area of land that drains to a lake, and the lake sort of integrates the things that are happening on that land that is draining to it. And so when we assess a lake, we're getting information about that lake, but we're also getting an understanding of what's happening on the land that's draining to that lake. And the watersheds that are being monitored as part of ALAP total to about 25% of the Adirondack Park. That's about the size of the state of Delaware. The Adirondacks are about the size of Vermont, so it's about a quarter of Vermont, just to give you a sense of scale of the land area that's being assessed as part of this program. So I've mentioned it's a volunteer monitoring program. So our professional staff, we do work on a handful of lakes in the region as well, but this program all of the sampling is done by volunteers. The volunteers are trained in standard limnological sampling protocols, and then they go out on either a 3 or 5 month schedule once per month and conduct the sampling. It takes most volunteers about an hour or two to do the sampling. When they're out there on the water, they're doing really 2 main things. They're measuring the transparency of the water using a Secchi disc, which is what this young person in this photo is doing. And that tells us a lot about the health of a water body. And it's something that's standard across the world, so we can compare to other regions around New York State, the country, and the world. And then they also collect a water sample using what we call a 2-meter integrated tube sampler, which is just basically a tube with a cork on the end of it. And then they bottle that sample up and deliver those samples to a regional hub or directly to our lab. But eventually they make it back to our lab here at AWI, where we analyze the chemistry of those samples for things like nutrients, which can affect the amount of algal growth in a lake, the amount of road salt, the acidity, and those parameters change over time. We're adaptive in our approach to monitoring. So as we learn about new threats to lakes in the Adirondacks, we sort of will add things into the program so that we can understand those threats. So there are a couple of objectives of the program, both from the perspective of the individual volunteer lake association, and then from our perspective as a group of sort of nerdy science folks. The main one is to document long-term trends in ecosystems. And so if we have sort of a single data point for a lake on any of these parameters, the amount of phosphorus, the algae, the salt, that tells us a lot of information about a lake for sure. But where we really see benefits is when we can track these things over time. And so, we often get calls from folks that, something changed a little bit in their lake from one year to the next. But it's hard to understand whether or not that's just the variation that exists within ecosystems, or we're actually seeing this long-term trend or direction occurring in that lake or that ecosystem. So we really like to see lakes enrolled for many years, and most of our lakes have been enrolled for a decade, or in quite a few of them actually for the whole, for over 2 decades now. And the ones that started in the program, most of them are still in the program. And so we're looking at documenting those long-term trends. We also want to establish a regional water quality database. And so by having these lakes spread across the Adirondacks, it gives us a really good picture at a regional level, what is going on with our lakes in the Adirondack region and how to best protect them. And we also want to see this data. It's a big sort of focus within AWI right now, is getting the ALAP data out into more places. Danielle mentioned sort of public repositories and all of the things that go along with that. We will happily give the data to anyone that wants to use it to advance our broad understanding of how lakes work and the threats to them and how they're changing over time. And just recently, we connected into something called the Global Lakes Ecological Observation Network, or GLEON, so that the data will eventually be available to people around the world and contribute to global research on how lake ecosystems function and are changing. It's also important for us that ALAP supports lake stewardship. So we know that when we get people and volunteers engaged with the sampling of a water body, their connection to it deepens, and they start to pay closer attention to what's going on around their lake and within the lake, and they start asking questions about the reports that they're getting. They start going to things like this, which is a symposium that the Adirondack Lakes Alliance hosts on an annual basis here at Paul Smith College. And so we really want to see ALAP supporting broader stewardship of our lakes in the region. And we've seen that with the volunteers that participate in the program. One of the things that I think makes our program unique is that you have a lake manager a phone call away if you participate in the program. So my background is in lake management. We have other staff here at AWI that have a lot of knowledge and expertise in managing lakes and addressing the issues that our lakes in the region see. And when you're a member of ALAP and you have a question about your report or something, you see something different in your lake, or maybe it's related to invasive species or whatever it might be, we're here to answer that phone, to talk to you through whatever your questions are. And if necessary, if more intensive monitoring or something else needs to be done on your lake, we're here to support those efforts as well. And that's the sort of story. This photo is of Mirror Lake in the village of Lake Placid. My colleague, Corey Laxon, who ran the program for many years, it enrolled in ALAP, and then we realized exactly what was going on with it in terms of road salt, and it quickly went to be monitored by staff because what needed to be done was more intensive than what volunteers could do. So each year that we issue a report, we used to issue these really detailed reports every year. We've switched to a 5-year cycle with those. But these reports have a lot of information in them about the data that we're presenting to folks. So it's a good educational resource for folks to read through, like, well, what is transparency? How do I measure it? Why am I doing this? What is chlorophyll A, phosphorus? So we have explanations of all of these things in the reports that we produce. We also include a regional synthesis. So you get to not only learn about what's going on in your lake, but you get to learn about what's going on in lakes across the entire region. And then we have individual lake reports, which give you the details of the specific water body that you're monitoring. And we also share with you sort of, because we're the regional program, where your water body ranks sort of on some of these metrics compared to other lakes in the region. So you can figure out, is my salt concentrations below what we're seeing in the region, about average, or above what we're seeing in the region. And one of the big successes of this program is, there's many little successes of how ALAP data has helped individual lakes, but on a regional scale, we take this data and then we do analysis and publications based on it. And the biggest example that I can share with us is the efforts that have come out of our understanding of road salt impacts in the Adirondacks as a result of the ALAP data. So it was the ALAP data collected by volunteers, and if there are any ALAPers on on the webinar right now, thank you so much for your participation, and know that your water sample went from your lake to our lab, into our databases, into scientific publications, to the governor's desk, and resulted in legislation to form the Adirondack Road Salt Reduction Task Force, which our executive director, Dan Kelting, sits on, to try and figure out solutions to this particular problem here in the Adirondacks. So it's a real highlight for us as scientists when we see our work make it into legislation. But I hope that the ALAP participants are also proud to know that your efforts out there on your lakes help to make that happen. And without your contributions, we couldn't have done that research. So I want to wrap up quickly with sharing a little bit about what's happening this year with ALAP. It's quite exciting, and opportunities for folks to get involved. So I mentioned through the 2021 season, we had 89 lakes that have participated in the program over its history. This year, we're trying to bump that number to 139, which is a pretty significant jump. And this is coming as a result of support from the Lake Champlain Basin Program and NUEPIC to help specifically expand it in the Lake Champlain Basin. We're hoping to have 20 lakes enroll through volunteer sampling, and then we're going to use our seasonal staff here, AWI, to cover sort of the difference, recognizing adding 50 lakes to a program in a single season is a little bit difficult, but that is what we're looking to do. So if you wanted to get involved with this, there's a couple of benefits to doing it this particular year. This is only open to lakes that are within the Lake Champlain Basin. I realize people probably don't have a good understanding exactly where that is. And so we have an online map. This is a screenshot of it. You can see where the basin is. It's just the New York side of the basin. The lakes need to be sampled in the 5-month program, which is from late May to early September. It's 1 sample per month. Plus, we're asking folks to do an invasive species survey that's very similar to and sort of in collaboration with APIP, which Brian's going to talk about. The advantages are that normally there's a $400 one-time equipment fee associated with joining ALAP. And then there's annual enrollment fees, which cover just the lab expenses, which can be anywhere from $250 to $350 a year, based on if you're in the 3 or 5 month program. And the Basin program is covering those fees this year for lakes that enroll in ALAP that aren't currently in a monitoring program. So this is a great opportunity even if you don't live on a lake, you have your favorite little lake or pond that you like to paddle on, or maybe it's down the road, for you to get involved with this program and participate this summer. And we would love to have folks sign up and join. And we hope that the lakes remain enrolled, but there's no commitment for folks to continue after this year of monitoring. And we're doing this specifically because we need this data to help prioritize best management practices and other management efforts in the Lake Champlain Basin. So if you want to learn more, you can scan this QR code on your screen with your smartphone. And also you can visit 80klakes.org/LCB to learn more about this particular volunteer effort. And I know I'm probably just over time, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass the mic over to Brian.
Thank you so much, Brendan. That was great. I'm really excited about these opportunities for people to become involved in these programs. Well, let me give Brian the mic after a brief introduction, and then we'll try and have some discussion and questions. So Brian Greene is a parent, a husband, and an outdoor enthusiast. He spent 2 decades as an environmental monitoring scientist, researching reptiles, amphibians, invasive species, water quality, and outdoor recreation. He likes to use data to help inform best management practices to steward special places. Brian works as the Aquatic Species Coordinator for the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. Community citizen science is one of his favorite professional activities, and he has coordinated projects in 3 different states over the past decade. You can find him in Saranac Lake, biking his kids around on his big blue cargo bike. Brian, are you all set here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. and we
Awesome.
can
And see
your,
my screen?
screen.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Well, I'm thrilled to be here with everybody today. It's awesome to follow up on Danielle and Brendan. I really love talking about community science, citizen science. I prefer to use the term community science because really what we are trying to do is empower and educate and engage people in our communities to use science to answer questions. So I'll kind of use community science, but also use citizen science. And it's a great program for invasive species. And I work for the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. We are one of the 8 New York's partnerships for regional invasive species management. They're called PRISMs. You can see a map. We are in charge of the Adirondack Park going up north to Canada. We are housed by the Nature Conservancy in Keene Valley, and the majority of the funding comes from the New York DEC Environmental Protection Fund. And our goal is to work with all our partners, organizations, communities, and collaborators to help reduce the negative impacts of invasive species in our region. And it's not just me, I am the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator, but we have a whole team. I'm going to be talking about a broad range of projects that we do. So if you are interested in any of these, there's somebody that can answer your question and get you involved. So let's talk about why community science works for APIP. We have a large geography, 6.5 million acres we're in charge of. There are many natural resources, over 10,000 lakes, 30,000 miles of streams, countless trees and forests in here. And that's a lot. There's no one organization or group that can monitor all of that. And so working with our communities is critical. The other thing that's key is that these projects are suited for a wide array of participants, from school-age students all the way through, retirees. And they're designed in a way that can capture quality data effectively and easy. That's important for us to be able to use. An important thing to remember is why people participate. And the main #1 reason people tell us is that they want to protect the environment. They have a strong sense of place and connection to our lands of water and waters that means something, and they want to give back. Here's an example. Here's a photo of one of our amazing volunteers, Bill, up on Upper Chattagay Lake. He's been going there since he was a kid to summer camps, and he has a home there. So he has an incredible wisdom and wealth of knowledge about that location that we're able to tap into and learn from him. Another thing that why people participate is that there's many options. We have aquatic, terrestrial programs. They're different times a year, so they can do multiple programs. And also they're easy and fun. We're getting people outdoors. They're usually already out there recreating, boating, hiking, and it's an easy ask for people. It's important to remember what works for these programs. I think it's really key that our programs are flexible. Most of our programs have low time commitments. We're usually asking them to go out once a season, so they can do them in as little as an hour. Technology helps. We're all carrying around these supercomputers in our smartphones. And as Danielle mentioned, it allows us to capture a lot of data in a real quality controlled and usable way, but it can also be a barrier. So we also have paper forms that people can fill out. And like everybody else has mentioned, this using and sharing of the data is critically important. We're not just keeping it for ourselves. We're using it in reports. We're sending it out to different places. And that is useful for us, for researchers, and for the communities that are collecting the data. So in APIP, we break our community science projects down into 2 groups. The first one is what we call early detection. These are basically people who go out there, are eyes and ears on the lands and waters. They are able to see things that we can't and let us know. And then the other one is management, where we have communities that are doing some type of action or best management practice to try to usually control invasive species, and we're able to collect data and assess that. So together, this makes up our community science programs. So I'm going to talk about some of these now in a quick overview. We have an aquatic program. It's called Lake Protectors, looking for invasive species. We have a terrestrial program called Forest Pest Hunters, looking for hemlock woolly adelgid. And then we use and work with IMAP Invasives, which does both aquatic and terrestrial environments. So Lake Protectors is the first program that we started with community science. It started in 2002. So over 20 years now. We have some volunteers that have actually participated in all 20 years, and some volunteers who've been more than a decade. We train volunteers how to identify and report aquatic invasive species, AIS. We currently focus on 14 species. These are species that you've probably heard of: Eurasian water milfoil, hydrilla, variable leaf milfoil, also plants. I mean, those are plants, but also animals and zooplankton, things like spiny water flea and zebra mussels. We've had thousands of surveys that people have completed and hundreds of participants. On this graph here, you can see that it kind of changes from year to year. Last year, we had 153 volunteers that monitored 110 different lakes across the region. And collectively, over the 20 years, you can see it's added up to be 464 lakes. So all of these lakes that you see colored blue have been monitored at least once. Some of them have been monitored over a dozen times, which is really important. The cool thing that we see is that 75% of our lakes are aquatic invasive species free. So these dark blue dots, the lakes on here, those are all, there's been no aquatic invasive species observed. And as they get lighter blue, we have ones that range from having 1 to 2 invasive species all the way up to Lake Champlain and Lake George, which have, more than 8 and almost more than 50 different invasive species on them. So this creates critical regional knowledge about the distribution of invasive species in our lakes. And this allows us and the communities to know, where do we need to prioritize prevention? Where do we need to prioritize management? Where do our boat stewards need to go that we work with AWI on? Where's decontamination stations? We use this for regional modeling and for understanding the vulnerability of lakes. So this is really important knowledge, and there's probably no one organization that could have collected all this across such a large area. So it's really been a great value from our volunteers. Switch over to our Forest Pest Hunters. This is our newest one. It started in 2021 to train people how to survey trails for hemlock woolly adelgid. It is an invasive insect that attacks hemlock trees, and we train people to go out and they adopt a trail in the southeast portion of the Adirondacks. And they go out during the wintertime and they survey and look for signs of hemlock woolly adelgid. We use a smartphone app, the IMAP app, to take photos and report GPS locations and observations, both where they observe it and where they don't observe it. And in 2021, we had 102 trails across the region monitored, which was incredibly successful for the first year. And we are having people again that are, somebody's probably going out today monitoring right now. And so this has been a really successful program for them. We'd love to have more people participate. Like I mentioned, IMAP Invasives. This is New York's statewide invasive species database. It's a way that we can crowdsource information from the public and our partners and volunteers. They are able to use either the internet or a smartphone app where they can see an invasive species, take a photo, put some information in about its abundance and distribution, and it records their location in a really easy way. And all that data is submitted, it's reviewed by experts for quality control, and then it is used for alerts for different managers and management. We use it for reports and for statewide modeling efforts to show us what areas are at risk, where invasive species are spreading. And this has been incredibly successful. And there are tens of thousands of records in this database that we all use. To give you an example of a success story is from last summer, Japanese stiltgrass, a member of a public of a homeowners association, observed Japanese stiltgrass, an invasive species that had not been observed in the Adirondacks before. And they contact APIP, they took a photo of it, they sent it to us. We were able to communicate with them to confirm that it was it. And then we worked with our staff to do a chemical treatment to try to manage it, to try to eliminate it. And we're able to do this all in a matter of, a month. And so this is a classic example of early detection, rapid response. And this is critical for invasive species. If we are hear about invasive species early on, we have a much higher likelihood of being able to eradicate it, and at a much lower cost. So this is kind of like our dream scenario. Somebody sees something, they let us know, and we're able to do something about it really quickly. So this was a great example from last summer. And that kind of gets us into our management program. So we have 2 of them that are community science-based, an aquatic one called Lake Management Tracker, and terrestrial, our knotweed coordinators. The knotweed coordinators, these are volunteers that we train to be able to identify and look for areas that have Japanese knotweed, one of our most common invasive species in communities and along streams and riparian areas. They assess sites prior to chemical treatment of them, and they help us secure landowner agreements, permissions, and forms to be able to do that management. And then APIP hires a professional contractor to go out and to do the treatment to reduce or eliminate the Japanese knotweed. And then the volunteers help us track and report sites for possible future actions and to help spread the word to their communities. In 2021, we had 9 volunteers participate. They monitored they got permissions for 85 different private and municipal landowner sites, and our contractor was able to treat 117 sites. Lake Management Tracker has been one of my favorite programs that we've done, and it is for communities and lake associations that are already invaded with an invasive species to assess their management success of the aquatic invasive species. For most of them, this is Eurasian water milfoil, and they were doing like hand harvesting or diver assisted suction harvesting to try to remove it. And so the question was, how successful are they being? So we've had 9 lakes participate since 2018, and they use point intercept surveys where they go out to the same place and do visual and rake toss observations. Here's me training some members from Friends of Moody Pond and Saranac Lake, and they collect the data in the Survey 123 app. And this is what the data looks like when it kind of gets to us. So you can see here's Upper Chattagay Lake. You can see the areas where they have where they've been gone out monitoring. The dark red are high densities, the going down lower to low densities, yellow, and the grays are none. And because they're monitoring the same place and doing the same thing over time, we can track trends. So you can see from 2019 to 2021, despite the management that they're doing, the number of locations and the density of Eurasian water milfoil is increasing. So here's an example of a success story from Loon Lake. They were our first lake to participate. They've been monitoring since 2018. This data show that from 2020 to 2021, if you look over here, approximately like 25% of the sites increased in density, 65% had no change, and approximately 8% decreased in there. So a net increase of around almost 17%. Their local funder, the municipality, wanted to actually cut the harvesting budget in 2022. The Lake Association was able to use this data and their long-term monitoring they've been doing for the past 4 years to justify the budget and that that it shouldn't be cut, and their local municipality agreed with them. So this is a great example of like an adaptive management process where we're setting goals, we're planning, we're doing management, we're monitoring, and then we're taking that data and turning it into information, and we're learning and we're using it. So this is really powerful. So some key points: communication is key. clear communication of what you're asking volunteers to do, how to do it, and celebrating the successes. We show off our volunteers on our social media and on our website. Using the data is critical. This is not collecting data to just sit in the spreadsheet is pointless. It's not. Collecting data to turn it into information that the communities can use, that researchers can use, that people can use is what makes it important and motivates people to do it. Besides this, all the data, we're getting this where people are learning, they're becoming active stewards. They're understanding how science works, and that's really empowering for them and for our communities. And I always like to tell people that volunteers are effective. They're not free. So a big red flag for me is when people say, oh, well, we don't have any money. We're just gonna get some volunteers to go out and do this. That's a big no. It takes time, money, and effort to equip them, train them, empower them, and thank them. And so if you have, so don't think that it's free. And so we need you to join us. If you liked any of these projects, you can join. So go to adkinvasives.com. You can send me an email, especially want to highlight our joint program we're doing this summer with ALAP. So getting all the ALAP groups to also monitor for invasive species. So with that, we'll turn it back over and see if we have any questions.
Thank you very much, Brian. We do have a question. Oopsie, I lost my screen here. Give me just a moment to get this. Question and answers and then chat. Okay, so we had, let me see if I can find this again. Stuart asked if about using diploid carp to address milfoil issues, and also he also asked about the triploid carp.
Yeah, so one of the management techniques that is used, it's not widely used, but is to put in a triploid or a essentially a sterile carp that they can't reproduce, but they would eat the vegetation. So this would be a good example of if a lake association group did that, they should also be participating in our lake management tracker program to see how effective the carp are at reaching their goals of trying to reduce the invasive species.
Kathleen asks, if your lake, I guess this one is to Brendan, if your lake participates in CSLAP, does it make sense to also do ALAP?
No, they're very similar. There are subtle differences between the two. So we generally don't encourage people to enroll in both. Well, we love to have lakes in ALAP. We also want to make sure that folks aren't unnecessarily duplicating efforts between those programs. The data is available for both. There are, you should sort of think about the differences between them, and if one of them makes a little more sense for you than the other. ALAP is very structured and targeted for the concerns that are specific to the Adirondacks, where CSLAP is trying to capture things that are happening on a state level. So happy to chat with folks if they have questions about that for their specific lake.
Okay, Deb Evans has worried about the conditions and fate of lakes that are wholly state shoreline, like Lake Durant and Horseshoe Lake. She says that Lake Durant is so full of milfoil, Eurasian, variable, and hybrid. Fishermen have said it's unfishable and swimmers don't have a great time swimming. It used to be good fishing, but now Lake Durant is not. Any plans to get the state on board to help with these lakes?
I'll answer that question. So yes, the majority of the work that is being done for like invasive species and lakes is being done by local communities and lake associations. So some of our lakes, are entirely on the forest preserve, and they don't have as many communities currently advocating for them. And so that's where, APIP tries to work with APA and DEC to see what kind of resources we can bring to it. But it is critical to have the public participate and advocate for it, because if there's not somebody trying to champion or, say the importance of these lakes, then our state and federal resources won't come to those communities.
looking to see if we have other questions. Robin Hoffman says that it's encouraging to know that there are so many people participating in the care of the Adirondacks. She also asks if anyone is monitoring Lake Everest at the Wilmington Town Park. She has concerns about the impact on water quality from development pressures. Again, that's Lake Everest in Wilmington Town Park.
Yes, so that was enrolled in ALAP a number of years ago, but the Ostable River Association has been monitoring it continually for the last 6 or so years. So you could reach out to them, and they're sort of your local watershed group that can help address the concerns that you might have as well.
Michelle is asking, is there a minimum size for a lake or pond to be included in ALAP?
That is a great question. The short answer is no. If you go to the website for the grant program we have, it's cut off at 4 hectares or acres. I can't remember which off the top of my head, but if there's a water body that you don't see on there, any water body that you're interested in, even outside of the basin, I would just encourage folks to reach out to us. There's contact information on the ALAP website, and we can talk about if there's any concerns related to size.
Are there any target lakes that you're keen to schedule in the new lakes to be included in ALAP 2022? Are you looking for volunteers for particular lakes?
Yes. So again, I would just ask if you're interested and you don't know what, you don't really have a preference, if you can just reach out to us and we'll help guide you towards a water body that would be most useful for us. We do know that most volunteers, we have higher retention when it's a place they have a connection to. So we're giving people free choice initially. We really appreciate the volunteers that are flexible and will go, sort of wherever they're asked. And there is a whole committee, Brian is part of that, that's helping to prioritize those water bodies that aren't self-selected by volunteers.
Deb asks that, or says that residents on Abenaki cleaned up the lake by using carp. Still there 20 plus years. I'm not sure how to, I think that's more informative.
Yeah, carp can, you'd be surprised, carp can live for a very long time. So that's why you do need to be careful. Any of the management techniques that we use for, doing water quality projects or invasive species, we really want to make sure that we are monitoring to see how effective they are, because they, we're using the data and the science, and this adaptive management plan is really the best way to kind of make improvements and answer our questions.
I noticed in Brendan's presentation that there were fees for being involved with ALAP that were there for equipment and for lab fees. In general, in your experiences with community science, are there other fees, or is it just for these high equipment and lab-based programs? Either Brendan or Brian can answer that.
Yeah, I think it varies quite a bit depending on, what is involved on the back end of the program. And I think, Brian rightly mentioned in his presentation that none of it is free. The time that volunteers put in, if you need to have a smartphone, that's a cost to the volunteer that, and maybe a barrier. So I think it varies quite a bit, but I don't know if Brian, you want to weigh in? I think all of APIP's programs don't have a fee associated with them.
Yeah, none of APIP's programs have a program fee. There are these indirect costs, like you have to transport yourself to the trailhead or have a boat to go out on the lake. And so yeah, there's a wide range of programs. The majority of programs, especially if you go in like Citizen, SciStarter, or any of these ones, they're trying to be as low cost as possible so that you can have as broad a range of people participate.
Well, unfortunately, we're at 11:03, and I've got other questions, but we'll save those for another day. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating, for Adirondack Research Consortium for pulling these webinars together, and at Paul Smith College for hosting them. If you are interested in a recording of this session or any of our webinars, you will find them at the Adirondack Research Consortium link on YouTube. And then the audio session will be on Spotify. Mel Johnson has promised to send us a link to this presentation after we're done. Mel or Dan, do you have any comments that you would like to share?
Just a big thank you to everyone for being a part of the series, and thank you to all of the participants for showing up. So we had people to talk to. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the fall.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.